Welcome to session 3 and insulation. I once asked a very clever man who does a lot of work around the world on energy efficiency and green building design. I said, what are the 3 most important things about green homes, green buildings? And he said, oh, that's easy. Insulate, insulate, insulate. And his point is made very well because all of the conversation we have around thermal mass and orientation and all that sort of stuff is important. But if you're going to have to turn a machine on, like a heater or a cooler, as long as a building is really well insulated, then you're not going to use much energy. You know, it'll use less energy to get warm or cool, and then it will stay that way for longer. So we really can't overstate the importance of insulation in green homes. And in that, we talked before about detail and getting it right. Insulation can suffer from the death of 1,000 cuts. If you think, oh, it's all right, a little bit missing there or whatever, it doesn't matter. It really does. And you only have to look at some thermal images to show where those leaks occur. And, you know, a sloppy job in insulation ends up being quite a waste of money because you've got all these little holes everywhere which leak more than the rest of the material that's running well protects a building from heat or cold. So really important to get this right. So you know that insulation is important, but you may not know the level of insulation that's important. This will be specified in your plan, but I just want to take a minute now to show why it's important. This book here, yourhome.gov.au, written and produced federally, fantastic resource. They've done a lot of science, a lot of research, and they, in that book, actually set minimum standards of insulation, which may or may not exceed the Building Code of Australia. It will have already been specified for your home, but you need to know that in most of Australia, you should be looking at a minimum R4.1 for the roof and the ceiling, and a minimum R2.8 for the walls. Now, it is worth exceeding those standards in circumstances, but you can also spend too much. There's no point putting R10 in the ceiling, for example, if you've only got R2 in the walls, because it just is a blanket on the top and the heat just leaks out around the side, for example. So it's important that the whole mix of insulation is right. It's not something that should just be, you know, yeah, bang a few slabs. Actually, we kind of really need to think about this stuff. So let's go and actually have a look at some insulation being put up.
One of the other critical things about building a green home is how the insulation is installed, and it has to be installed correctly for it to work properly. It's important that it is installed like this piece here, where it's nice and neatly cut to the stud size or the wall size, the cavity size, and it has its own, it supports itself. You'll see with this particular piece here is just been shoved in, which is quite common to fill the space. That insulation actually is not doing anything because it's compressed. That's not a good install. That piece needed to be cut perfectly to that size, and all of these pieces when they go in should be like that. So insulation should be nice and fluffy and sit amongst and hold its own weight in every opening.
Thinking about you as a builder, specifically, how can your insulation go wrong? We've looked at sealing and worked out what you need to do. Remember that we talked about insulation and what can go wrong. Sorts of things that go wrong are, again, leaving those little gaps around the architraves, around the windows, that sort of thing, where air can seal out, but also where heat can just transfer because there's no insulation material in there. If you haven't taped those external joints, then again, you know, you've got an opportunity for heat transfer through your sarking where it's not sealed properly. Using the wrong insulation in a cavity so it sags, you know, and over time it looked good when you left the building, but over time it sagged down, and then now the top third of that particular cavity has no insulation at all. Big leak. And of course it was quite pronounced at the time because of the fires that had been caused, but making sure that you don't cover the downlights. Admittedly now we're much better at that. LEDs have less heat than the old halogen lights, but you still need to be careful when you're putting insulation in the roof. So those are things that can really go wrong with your insulation as well, things to keep an eye out for.